right, welcome everybody to Podcasting with Friends Movies. I'm Nick Moffat, and I'm here today with Brandon Bowlby.
Hey guys, how's it going?
And Sean Bowlby, Brandon's brother.
Hello.
How's it going, Sean?
It's going good.
Today we're going to be recording and we're going to be talking about the fall movies, so the movies that came out within the last 2 to 3 months. We're going to be going over some of our favorite ones. We're going to be talking about some featured movies like Blade Runner and Thor, but we're also going to be talking about some smaller art house movies, some Netflix originals, and at the end we're going to run through a bunch of indies and do short reviews on some movies that we don't really have a lot to talk about, but we still wanted to cover. So, do you guys have general impressions of the last few months? It's like the pre-Oscar season type of time. Brandon, what do you think? How was the last few months for you?
I mean, there's definitely like a late August, September lull that happens where you're not seeing the summer blockbusters, but the like end of the year, really well-made dramas haven't started coming out yet. But man, this last month, I've been going to the theater so often, especially mixed with Movie Pass, and like seeing my average personal rating of movies, I've seen some amazing films these last 3 weeks. Like 5 or 6 in a row that I gave 4.5 stars. It was really fun.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean with that. Like, I didn't really go and see into the theater too much throughout October because I was doing horror movie month. But then November hit, and it was like I was going to the movies like 3 times a week. I don't know. I looked at it later on. Like, I just looked at it yesterday, and I had gone to the theater 9 times throughout November, which is above average because my average is usually 3 to 4 times, like once a week. So I don't know if that was Movie Pass or if there were just a bunch of movies I wanted to see, but November was a great month for me.
Yeah, and I feel like that another strong part is it seemed like not more than a week would go by without something big coming out or a big movie that everyone was talking about all the way through August and October.
Yeah, it's definitely that month where you start feeling like now you're lagging behind because there's just so much content to get into.
Mm.
So, Sean, this is the first time we've had you on the show.
Yeah.
Like, how has 2017 been for you overall?
Yeah, it's been really good. I feel like all the way through there was very little downtime, especially throughout the summer. It was just one right after the next of something I was really anticipating, and it's been a great year.
How about some of your personal run-throughs you've been doing?
Yeah, I do like these kind of abridged anthologies, and I had a strong year with that too. I'm doing a Western movies right now. I'm just starting that out, but before that I was doing Akira Kurosawa. I watched 15 Kurosawa movies, and I'd never seen any of his movies before, and I just kind of blew through them and loved just about every single one of his movies, and he very quickly became one of my favorite directors, if not my favorite.
That's so cool.
Yeah, what movie are you going to force me to watch when I come home next month?
Seven Samurais.
Oh, right. I've heard about that one forever.
Yeah. That's his most well-known. Or
I really hope I'm around when you guys watch Seven Samurai. I've been wanting to watch that movie for years. I don't know why I haven't. The only Kurosawa movie I've seen is Rashomon, and I was blown away by it.
Yep.
And then hopefully our Tarkovsky run-through is going to be coming up later, early next year.
Yep.
Anyway, let's get started going over some of our featured reviews. The first movie we're going to talk about is Blade Runner 2049, the sequel to the Ridley Scott classic. This film was directed by Denis Villeneuve. First, I wanted to ask you guys, how was your overall experience seeing Blade Runner 2049 in the movie theater? I know I saw it at Cinerama, and it was jaw-dropping. Where did you guys see it? What was your format?
I saw it at the Boeing IMAX, which I don't go there very often at all, and it was awesome. It was almost even like the audio was almost even too loud, but in a really good way, and it was just incredible experience overall.
Yeah, I got to see it in IMAX as well. I was in Providence, Rhode Island, and I went to their mall IMAX theater they have at Regal there.
Nice. So, making a sequel for a movie that came out so long ago, I feel like it's always pretty risky. You know, we live in like a nostalgia culture right now, so it's like, is this coming out just to make money, or do they actually have something to say? How do you guys think Blade Runner 2049 stands against the original Blade Runner?
Yeah, so one thing I've said about this movie a few times is that it's a movie that exists for no other reason than to be good. I don't feel like for a movie like this, nostalgia plays that big of a role, because I don't think a whole lot of people have seen it for a big Hollywood blockbuster that cost, $180 million to make. So I really feel like they understood well that this movie just exists to be a good movie, and that's all it really has writing on it. And I think that they did a great job with that and let Denis Villeneuve do what he really wanted to do, and I feel like everyone was kind of on the same page with this movie.
So, Brandon, what works in Blade Runner 2049?
Denis Villeneuve works in this film. As far as too many sequels happening these days, I definitely, when I first heard of this movie, there wasn't anything really grabbing me, and I thought it might have been a little gimmicky. I'm taking this one of the most classic sci-fi films of all time and trying to put a sequel to it in 2017. But as soon as Denis Villeneuve's name was attached to it, I completely hadn't let my guard down, and the anticipation started building. They just found the right director and the right cinematographer, Roger Deakins, and they really could do no wrong.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. I feel like Blade Runner 2049 was hands down the most gorgeous movie I've seen all year. Every shot in it could have been a painting. You could take any shot in the movie and frame it, have it as a piece of art at your house. If Roger Deakins doesn't win Best Cinematographer at the Academy Awards this year, it is a crime. He's never won before, and he goddamn needs to win for this movie.
He's been nominated 14 times.
Yeah. I feel like he's the Martin Scorsese of cinematographers right now, and and I guess the kind of difference between them was when Martin Scorsese finally won his Academy Award, it wasn't his best movie. A lot of people would not say that was his best movie. But this, I think there's a good case to be made that this is Roger Deakins' best work.
Yeah, I hear that. And, for me, I don't know if this is blasphemous to say, but I kind of think that Blade Runner 2049 surpasses the original Blade Runner. I mean, I really like the original Blade Runner. I love how it's a film noir. I love how gritty the streets are, and how, it's a gorgeous film on top of it all as well. But I kind of feel like Blade Runner 2049, it takes the same themes from the original, except it goes further with them. I feel like it's a little bit more gorgeous just based on the technology and where we're at in the world. Blade Runner 2049 isn't really a noir like the other one, but it still has mystery elements, and it keeps you questioning, and it keeps you engaged. I didn't grow up with the original Blade Runner, and so I think that's kind of part of my thing where I didn't see the original until this year. So it's kind of unfair for me to say, but in some ways I feel like Blade Runner 2049 surpasses the original.
Yeah, I feel like the original is not without its faults, as incredible of a film it is. And those faults have been talked endlessly, leading up to this sequel, of where the first one lacked. And I think this new one picked up the slack in those departments, with clearly the complexity of the storyline and the characters not being so flat, and really took it up a notch on those aspects. And so, yeah, like you're saying, there's an argument to be made that this is the better film. It improves on almost every aspect that the original had. I'm like a big sucker for that ending monologue and those very last 2 minutes of the original. And I think maybe the new one lacked that impactful moment at the end just to make it all come together in one instance. But besides that, this is going to be one of the best films of the year for me, my top 10 list.
Yeah. My only thing I would say about that is that I think this movie does a great job of doing that visually. If you compare each individual aspect of the movie one to one, I think this movie is an equal to the original, and then in some categories I would say it is better. So in terms of character, I think Ryan Gosling's character in a lot of ways is more, his story is more like the more interesting character of the first one, which was Roy Batty's character, who wasn't the focus of the movie. He kind of came in and out of the storyline, but I thought he was a far more interesting character who had a bigger impact on the plot and where the story was going than Deckard had on the plot. So I think making this one about a replicant who is dealing with the kind of philosophies of what it is to be human and what emotions are and everything, I think that was a great choice, and I think kind of is more interesting to me than what the first one was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's move on to the next movie. The next movie we're going to talk about is called The Florida Project. This is a smaller indie movie that didn't get released into the bigger theaters, but it was definitely one of the best movies of the year. Directed by Sean Baker, the follow-up of his last movie, Tangerine. The Florida Project was a movie about a family that was living at a motel in Florida outside of Disney World. Apparently, in real life, there are these hotels that are kind of disguised as resorts for Disney World, but then really they're kind of run-down places where low-income people are living. Basically, this movie is like shot like it's a fly on the wall. It's extremely realistic. It's like showing you a part of life, a place in life of these people that exist, but you don't normally get their perspective. The main character is this little girl. Her mom is negligent. You know, she loves her daughter, but she's basically a kid herself. It's heartbreaking and sad, but real as fuck.
Which is surprising. Like, I mean, I kind of knew better because I saw Sean Baker's first film, Tangerine, which is also very much in the same light as the Florida Project. But from the trailer, when you watch it, it is kind of like, it shows it as a lighthearted little indie, like cute film. And I took like some friends who were in town to it, kind of hoping it would be in that direction. And we were completely surprised with just like the level of realism and where this movie like takes its characters and kind of how dark and sad it does get. I remember there's one thing, like listening to the audience in the theater's reaction to this film from the beginning, like people laughing and chuckling at the antics you're kind of seeing, and just kind of the long spiral into just everyone being completely shut up. While the content on the screen really hasn't changed, it's just like the way it compounds on top of itself and builds. By the end, you kind of see the exact same interactions, but in a completely different way. And that was really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, for me, coming from social work, it was not enjoyable watching this movie. It was kind of like seeing another side of some of the families I've worked with. And I kind of felt like I was doing work when I was watching the movie. Like I kept thinking like, oh my gosh, they need to be teaching this girl how to behave. Like, why isn't anyone taking care of her? It was very frustrating watching it, but that does not change the fact that it was a amazing movie. It was so honest and really, I mean, it was one of those movies where there weren't any of those quote-unquote movie moments. There weren't any of those like quippy dialogue lines. There weren't any of those like, you know, soundtrack moments where like, you know, something happens. There weren't any like profound character arcs or anything like that. It was like real life, as bleak and as honest as it is. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about the next featured movie, Thor Ragnarok. The new movie in the MCU, directed this time by Taika Waititi. Sean, I know you saw Thor Ragnarok twice in the movie theater. How do you think it stands to the rest of the MCU?
What I say about the movie is it was so goddamn funny that I did not care at all. That it was kind of bland and a pretty standard, typical, kind of boring Marvel movie. But it was very unique in how funny it was and how Taika Waititi really drew the comedy out of the characters and the actors to make it a very unique Marvel movie. And I would say it's definitely the funniest Marvel movie, even funnier than Guardians of the Galaxy. But it does have a lot of problems, plot-wise, structure-wise, and character-wise that frankly I didn't even really think about or care about while I was watching the movie. But after the movie, thinking about it really stand out to me. So I would not put it up there with some of the best Marvel movies, but it is definitely the funnest and the funniest, and it is one of the most enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. I think maybe a little over 50% of this film was really, really strong. Everything that happened on the new planet and all the characters you're introduced to and the way they kind of like realize the sets and the costumes and everything that's happening on this new world is really great and has all the funniest parts as well.
Absolutely.
And then, but on the other side of that, I kind of was very underwhelmed with everything else that was going on in the storyline, including like the ending. I felt was a little straightforward as far as like save the people kind of ending that we've seen in a lot of films. I do want to say that I was really happy with the Doctor Strange cameo. His appearance in the film was actually really like had a lot of charisma, and it got me excited to see more of Doctor Strange for sure.
I loved this movie. I thought Taika Waititi's style totally came through. I thought I'm with you, Sean. I think it was the funniest MCU movie. Like, I feel like all three of them that came out this year, Guardians Volume 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, and Thor Ragnarok, all three of them were extremely funny.
So strong.
Yeah, and like Marvel's kind of taken steps to change up the formula a little bit, so they're not all exactly the same, and there's fun things to pull out of them that really separate the characters. But yeah, this one kind of suffers from the same stuff that a lot of them suffer from. Like the villain isn't that strong. You know, I mean, she's strong in context of the movie, but like in terms of a character, we could have gone more. The emotional moments aren't necessarily earned, like the stuff with Anthony Hopkins, Thor's father, you know, not totally earned, but like Jeff Goldblum was so amazing in it. Like Jeff Goldblum stole the movie for me. Like every single thing he said was hilarious. There were a lot of stuff like that. Like Thor and the Hulk's relationship was fun throughout. Just seeing the Hulk in a different context, it kind of actually gave me hope that they could make another Hulk movie, just because his character seemed to be evolving and seemed to be going in another direction.
And I feel like a lot of people say that Jeff Goldblum stole the scenes that he was in, and kind of was one of the best parts of the movie. But I think Taika Waititi was another one that stole just about every scene he was in. I forget the name of that character, but the big rock creature, he was amazing too. And then thinking about how much comedy they were able to pull out of the relationship between the brothers Loki and Thor, and how good some of that stuff was. And
wait, the comedic rock guy was Taika Waititi?
Definitely, isn't that?
Oh, yeah. I thought it was one of the Flight of the Conchords guys.
Yeah, I did at first too, but yeah, it was totally him.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. It's really amazing that they're able to pull that off. I actually really feel like the action took a back seat in this movie, like almost purposefully. I don't know if it's because Taika Waititi doesn't really do action that much, but I kind of felt like all of the action scenes were more about the characters interacting with each other than they were the action.
I wonder how much of that was just Taika Waititi not being an action director at all, just kind of let other people take the reins on the action while he played to his strong suit with the comedy and the characters.
Okay, so let's move on to our next movie. The next movie we're going to talk about is Lady Bird. It's the first film that actress Greta Gerwig directed. I think she wrote it as well. It's a coming-of-age story about this girl growing up in Sacramento. It's basically her senior year of high school, and she's applying for colleges. She's going to prom. She's meeting and hanging out with boys. She's got her best friend. She's got this intense, emotional relationship with her parents, especially her mother. What did you guys think? Brandon, what were your overall impressions of this movie?
This movie is just like almost perfect. I guess not to sound like negative, but I don't think there was anything about this movie that like I just absolutely drop dead loved, but there was absolutely nothing that I disliked. This movie so well executed for being a typical coming of age film, and just like kind of so much better than it should be for its subject matter. Yeah, everything is flawless. The ending kind of ruined me at one point. It was one of the few times I've cried in theaters this year. I really respect this movie. I think it's gonna, it reminds me of like The Breakfast Club a lot in its sentimentality. Maybe not as classic as that, but it's right up there with those kind of well executed coming of age films.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of in the same vein as I don't know, a coming of age story like Juno and The Edge of 17,
Right? Yeah.
except for it didn't have a snarky, snappy dialogue type character, and it played it a lot more real and heartfelt than those movies did.
Yeah, for sure.
And I also think, an interesting thing about this movie is, for me, it did almost exactly what Boyhood did for me. I kind of came away with the same emotions and had a very similar ending to Boyhood, but it did it in 90 minutes, and it only was 1 year of this person's life. And I give the movie a lot of credit for playing it off like that.
Yeah. What I loved most about this movie was the relationship between the daughter and her mother. I thought it was so emotionally complex. Like, there were so many levels of, like, if you're peeling an emotional onion, it's one of those things where, like, there are so many layers to how they felt about each other. And the movie didn't take shortcuts with it. It was in your face. It was real as it could be. And there's a lot of variables with it. Like, I've had conversations with multiple people about the future of their relationship and how they move on and how much baggage each of them has because of the other person. I don't know. I thought the relationships between the characters was so honest and real. And to me, it was one of the better coming of age stories I've seen probably in a few years. Like, if you're into coming of age stories, I would highly recommend this movie because it's one of the better ones.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, Sean. Like, that's definitely the angle this movie takes, and it's so well written and basing like all the character interactions in reality and making it that much more relatable. While a lot of other films in this genre are a little more sassy and witty, this one doesn't go there, and it's a lot better for it.
It's like it's in the middle between Juno and the Florida Project. You know, like we talked about the Florida Project earlier as realism, and the Florida Project didn't have any of those, like I said, movie moments, while Juno is completely full of those silly, stupid things that she says. While Lady Bird, there are a few times in the movie where it's like, oh yeah, this is a movie. Like, these kind of things only happen in movies. But the relationships are totally real and totally honest. And I could see them happening in real life.
Yeah, and I love how it's a movie about someone who grows up to realize that people who don't like Dave Matthews Band aren't worth being friends with.
Yeah. So the next movie we're going to talk about is Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. It's a new film by Martin McDonagh. His other films were Seven Psychopaths and In Bruges. So basically, if you've seen either of those movies, you know that you're going to get a bleak, nihilistic comedy. Basically, it's about a mother whose daughter was, before the movie starts, her daughter was raped and killed, and she buys 3 billboards, or rents 3 billboards, and asks the police department and the town why there haven't been arrests. And it caused a ruckus and fury in the people in the town. Both of you guys have seen this movie. What are your general thoughts?
Like I've said, this movie, in the best way, when you leave the theater, feels like you just watched like 4 movies worth of movie. The like onslaught of twists and turns and character interactions, and like you get super giddy, you get super excited, and then they pull the rug out from underneath you. Like, this will be up for best screenplay. This is like one of my favorite films of the year. I've not seen any other films directed by Martin McDowell, but I cannot wait to go back and see his other two films because his style is so unique and he has a lot going for him.
Sean, what about you?
Yeah, I loved this movie, and I could probably gush about this movie for a while, but I laughed, I cried, I was, it satisfied on so many emotional levels, and just how the movie kind of ends in a place that you could not have possibly predicted. It ending in it ends in such a way that is so emotionally fulfilling, but is so far from where you thought it would go, and
but unforced too.
Yeah, it so naturally goes to this completely different place, and everyone was so good. Sam Rockwell and Frances McDormand, and there were so many great moments that I cried a couple times in this movie.
Yeah, I really like Martin McDonagh. I think that his style it's kind of, I don't want to say it's one of a kind, but it's one of those, it's like, I feel like dark black comedies used to be a bigger, like there used to be more dark comedies that would come out like in the early 2000s, and they kind of faded away a little bit, and he's kind of bringing them back. Like he strikes the balance perfectly of violence, emotional, sadness, dark, like real life stuff, but then hilarious, over the top, ridiculous things that are happening. And like he makes you laugh first, and then the violence happens, and then he makes you laugh again. I think that's really amazing. I kind of feel like maybe I didn't like this movie as much as you guys, though. I had a few like nitpick things with it. I kind of left the theater with a few questions, and some of the motivations of some of the people were kind of questionable for me. Some of the choices they made kind of took me out of the movie a little bit. But they're all like nitpicky things. I still gave the movie 4 stars instead of like 4.5. So
the characters are another thing that is did really well. Caring about and treating some of the characters that you would almost despicable characters, and somehow turning them into really human characters who are just dealing with life, and and to make you sympathize with some of these characters was a pretty amazing feat.
And not everything was like black and white. Like our main protagonist was so far from perfect, and they let you know that almost immediately in the story. And the sheriff as well is probably what she's set up to probably be the antagonist, is maybe one of the most like pure characters in the film. The characterization in this movie is really unique and different.
Yeah, that's kind of Martin McDowell's thing, is to take people who are very unlikable on paper. Rapists, racists, like bigots, and people with all sorts of problems and prejudices, and humanize them and make you relate to them and make you see that there's more to them than just those black and white things. That he lives in a very, very gray, his movies are very gray with their characters, and he makes you come around to them on many different levels. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to switch out of our featured movies. Those are kind of our main movies that we were talking about. We're going to switch into our indie corner. So these are movies that either were in some of the smaller theaters or were straight to Netflix movies. So the first movie we're going to talk about is called Good Time. It's directed by the Safdie brothers. I haven't seen this one. I think, Brandon, you're the only one that's seen it.
Yeah, I was hearing a lot of good things about this movie. and I was really, really impressed with it. It's kind of about these two brothers who at the beginning get in trouble, and one of the brothers goes to jail. The other one, who got out clean, is trying to make bail for him in like 24 hours. It's kind of one of those like almost storyless films that you're not supposed to make. You know, like a guy walks down the street and random things happen to him throughout his day. It's kind of one of those movies mixed in with just this guy trying to make money for his brother's bail throughout the 2 hours of the film. But what makes this movie stand out is just how well paced and how well written the things that end up happening to him on his adventure overnight. One thing leads to the next, and everything keeps tying in and out of each other. And like the chaos that he kind of ends up getting himself into is just fascinating to watch and so thrilling and exciting. And this movie is shot in Brooklyn, Queens, New York, and almost all at night. And the cinematography and the lighting and kind of the way they make like the darkness of New York City is just like a really fascinating backdrop for the film. So I highly recommend it.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds really fascinating. I can't wait to watch it. I know it's available at Redbox, well, certain Redboxes, and like on Vudu and stuff. So I'm going to be trying to watch that in the next couple weeks. The next movie that we want to talk about is called The Meyerowitz Stories, New and Selected. It's the new film by Noah Baumbach, and it's on Netflix right now. It stars Adam Sandler, Ben Stiller, and Elizabeth Marvel as siblings, and then their dad is Dustin Hoffman. And it goes through each of their perspectives and kind of shows you their relationship with their father through their perspective, one story at a time. I know personally I have a lot of mixed feelings about Adam Sandler, most of them negative, but shit, in this movie I absolutely loved him, and I thought all the relationships were totally real. And Noah Baumbach, he's one of those filmmakers who makes very, very tense, realistic movies, which sometimes are hard to watch. And I went in this movie hoping that it would be my favorite Baumbach movie, and it turned out it was completely my favorite Noah Baumbach movie.
Wow. That's great. That's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, what are some of his other ones? Like Frances Ha, Mistress America,
While We're Young,
The Squid and the Whale, Margot at the Wedding. Like all those movies, I feel like his movies are so much about perspective. It was just so honest about their relationships, and there are all these little subtle moments.
It rarely becomes melodramatic for what is a family drama film. I don't know if you guys follow Nerd Writer, but he just came out with an incredible episode about this film earlier today. It's called What Realistic Film Dialogue Sounds Like. And it's one of the best episodes he's put together. And it kind of made me like the film even more. I mean, I noticed how like complicated and how much people were like talking over each other in this film, and the different like perspectives that were going in on this family dynamic. But kind of contrasting that to how a lot of other writers write, like Quentin Tarantino or Aaron Sorkin, who are like going for like perfect, clean, crisp dialogue at every moment. This is kind of like the opposite of that, and really like making you think about how these characters like are playing off of each other.
Totally. Like the opening scene, Adam Sandler's just driving around with his daughter trying to find a parking space, and he's like she's talking to him, and he's yelling at other people in the car,
Yes,
like
exactly.
other drivers, and then he turns on the radio and he's searching for the Mets game, and there's so much happening in the dialogue, all jumping all at once.
Yeah, characters constantly having multiple conversations with each other at the same time and just not listening to what the other person is saying. It's so well written.
That's something that's pretty rare too in movies is people not understanding or not listening to the other people. Usually it's, the communication in movies is so direct and it's one person right after the other, and I haven't seen this movie, but that's the impression I get from it and from everything.
Cool. So let's move on to the next movie. The next movie we want to talk about is called The Square. Brandon, do you want to talk about The Square? Give a brief rundown on it.
Yeah, so The Square is a Swedish film. I got really excited about this film because it won at Cannes Film Festival at the beginning of this year, which pretty much signifies it's going to be like a great movie. If you go back the last like 8 or 9 films that have won, they're always some of the best. So I was anticipating this film all year, and finally it came out. And yeah, I loved it. This is kind of actually more of a comedy than I expected. It deals with modern art, postmodernism, in this museum in the middle of Stockholm. And it follows the guy who kind of runs and curates the gallery there in the city. And it just deals with the people who run the place, the parties they have, and kind of like the comedic hypocrisy that a lot of them run into in their job dealing with the art world. The film makes fun of everything on kind of all sides of the spectrum and like takes jabs subtly and not subtly at a lot of different aspects of that way of life. And it's also like more impeccably made than it kind of has any right being. Like there's just beautiful, beautiful shots and incredible staging, long takes, things going on like deep in the backgrounds that you're not even focusing on that are like making you crack up, or it's like a very meticulously made movie, which is not all that common for comedies.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it too, and I liked it a lot. I thought it had more style than a lot of movies that came out this year. Like, kind of like Blade Runner, how almost every shot could have been like a framed picture. I agree, it was much funnier than I thought it was going to be. Like, it was a pretty hilarious movie. Yeah, my only problem with it was that I felt like the characters weren't like deep enough. Like there wasn't enough going on with the characters to justify how long the movie was. Like I kind of felt like it lost track of itself. It was over 2 hours long. It was like almost 2.5 hours long, and it kind of felt like it got kind of lost at the end of what it had. It had a lot of style, and it was making a lot of points and critiques about the art world, and it had this whole thing about charity, and like in the movie he was trying to make a point about homelessness, and then the movie was kind of saying that it's easier to say that you're doing something about homelessness than actually doing something. But that's like something the movie was saying, but I kind of felt like it lost track of itself by the time we got the 2.5 hour mark with the characters and what they were doing.
Right. There are very long scenes in this movie that just play out, and you kind of, there's a few that you just like really want it to end because it's getting so uncomfortable, but it ends up being like 8 minutes longer than it should be. That's it is part of the style of this movie. Yeah, I understand anyone who felt that 2.5 hours is a lot for this kind of comedy.
So let's move on to the next movie, Brawl in Cell Block 99. Directed by S. Craig Zoller, same guy who did Bone Tomahawk, if anyone has seen that one. So going into this movie, I expected a slow, maybe quiet, violent film. It stars Vince Vaughn. Basically, he gets into some trouble. He goes to prison, and then it's a descent into hell after that. All three of us have seen this movie. I know I really liked it. I know, Brandon, you really liked it. And maybe Sean didn't like it as much. First of all, Vince Vaughn. I'm wondering how come no one has ever cast Vince Vaughn in a role like this before. He can beat up or destroy anybody, but he also is a kind person that he cares about his wife and he wants to work on their relationship.
Has very strong morals.
Yeah. And so then the movie just takes you into a descent. He gets in trouble, he goes to jail, and then it's a descent into hell of how far will he go to save the people that he cares about. I did have a few issues with that. I feel like it gets a little cartoony at some parts. Like there's a few moments in the movie where I was like screaming how gruesome it was. But then in the same scene, maybe it goes a little too gruesome where it's like goofy. You know what I mean? I just wish they had it's like diminishing returns with the gruesomeness a little bit. Besides that, I really enjoyed this movie.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nose. Like, it's all about Vince Vaughn's character. And in this kind of typical revenge film, they place a very like unique person in the center of it with just how this guy knows everything that he is doing and what is right and what is wrong. And he does certain things just because he has to. And he would never have done them otherwise. It's like a really different take on the like protagonist we're not used to in this kind of revenge film. I kind of liked the like border of fantasticalness that this movie plays on. You know, as he descends further and further, he kind of goes to places that clearly like aren't based in reality, but are just kind of pushing the envelope of what could exist in like a corrupt prison system. And so I kind of like did enjoy that like kind of bit of fantasy that was placed throughout this movie. And especially with just like, as you're saying, like how strong Vince Vaughn is, like he's stronger than a normal human being ever could be. And it's like writing the line in a playful way there. I think one thing that didn't help this movie was it is a slightly lower budget film. You know, it was released direct to Netflix. I don't know if we talked about that, but it also kind of had like a really annoying super blue color gradient that I don't think helped at all. But it was like nearly black and white at some points just because they like way overdid its blue color correction. And that really bugged me a lot. But yeah, I overall enjoyed this film. I gave it like 4 stars.
So I wasn't into this movie. I guess for me there didn't really seem to be any kind of character conflict or really much conflict that played throughout the movie at all. I mean, it just seemed like at every moment, Vince Vaughn just knew what he had to do, and he just went and he did it. He wasn't struggling with his morality. He wasn't struggling with his anger. There was no struggle with what he was doing. It's just at every moment, whenever a problem came, he just knew what he had to do, and that was it. And on top of that, I guess I was struggling with what this movie really was. I wouldn't say it's an action thriller. It's not a brutally violent action movie. It's not a crime drama. It's not a gangster movie, or and so I was just like, throughout the whole movie I was struggling with, what is this movie? And I know it was stylized, but I guess like there was nothing that for me to really hold on to throughout the movie that worked well.
That's interesting, because I hear all those criticisms for sure. Like I can't argue with any of those.
I can.
But it's funny because I was telling you you should put Bone Tomahawk on your Western film list at the very end for a modern Western, but now I'm not so sure.
Oh yeah.
Such a downer.
No, I mean, it's cool. Like, it's definitely not a movie for everybody. What you're saying about it not being anything, like what kind of movie it was, like, that's pretty interesting to me, where, like, you're right. Like, I don't know how to describe this movie to someone. Like, I was trying to the other day, and I was like, yeah, Vince Vaughn is a badass, and he just beats people up, and he's superhuman, and has to do a lot of crazy things.
Yeah, but even then, none of that even happens till like an hour and 30 minutes into the movie.
I don't know, man. I feel like he breaks a lot of people's arms throughout the movie.
It's hard. It really is hard for me to classify it as anything.
But then also, like, does a movie need to be classified as well?
Yeah, I don't know. Not necessarily, but...
Well, let's move on. The next movie that we are going to talk about is called The Killing of a Sacred Deer. It is directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, the same guy who did The Lobster, which came out a couple years ago. I'm kind of struggling with how much of the plot we should talk about with this movie, because it's surprising when they kind of reveal what the plot is. Brandon, what do you think? Should we talk about what the plot is?
I knew nothing about the plot. I actually had not even seen a trailer when I went into this movie, and the way the two main characters like slowly develop is so shocking and surprising when it's not spoiled for you. So I think going in the dark for this movie is by far the best way to do it because it is a slow, amazing build up. This movie is one of my favorite movies of the year. It is like just oozing with style in every single shot and every single scene. It really reminded me of like the Neon Demon from last year, of just like one of these directors that just has this like incredible visual sense. The movie is like intense and really shocking at moments. It's kind of like plays in a world of fantasy as well. It's one of the darkest comedies I've ever seen because while everything that's going on around you is horrifying, there was a lot of people in the theater that were appropriately finding moments to like have a good laugh and chuckle at kind of the absurd situations they were getting into.
I feel like I need to I feel like it's very connected with his other film, The Lobster, in that both movies are like intensely existential. They make you question who you are and what you believe in sometimes, like at moments. Like for me, like after The Lobster was one of my favorite movies the year that it came out. And it was so powerful to me because after I watched it, I was spent into a spin for like weeks afterward. Like I just kept thinking about the movie. I kept questioning my decisions in life and all these different things. And it's so stylized and hilarious, but dry. And that's exactly how this movie is. It's so like to the point. The characters talk in a very specific way. Like immediately, it's the same director as The Lobster. Just for me personally, this movie didn't hit as hard as The Lobster did. I had a hard time with certain aspects of it, but I think that it could hit people the same way that The Lobster hit me. Does that make sense? Like, just because it didn't hit me as hard doesn't mean that it won't hit you as hard.
Right. You see the things are there, and it just depends on how well they rub off on you.
Is that because he's such a unique director and writer that like experiencing that for the first time is so powerful, or like why didn't it affect you as much as Lobster did?
Well, so both Lobster and The Killing of a Sacred Deer kind of exist in a fantasy world, and I had an easier time buying into the fantasy world of The Lobster than I did The Killing of a Sacred Deer for reasons, but I don't really want to talk about the reasons too much.
No, that makes sense.
In Killing of a Secret Deer, like not a single character speaks how anyone in reality speaks. Like you said before, Nick, like this movie is dry beyond belief. And I think people watching this movie can be like the normal person stumbling into this movie. Like it's laughable the way these characters speak and interact with each other. To me, it was fascinating, and it worked within the world that this movie created. But for a lot of people, it could be probably a big turnoff. There's a performance in this movie that is so unbelievably good. I don't know if it had an impact on you, Nick, the same way. Like the boy that the father's kind of looking after in this film, like that kid needs an Oscar. I could not believe it.
Gosh, that kid was so. Oh my gosh, that kid he was unsettling on so many levels.
I guess his name is Barry Keoghan, and he was actually in Dunkirk as well earlier this year. But he is disturbing on all levels, and he takes that performance to the next level. And I hope he gets some recognition for it.
I think he kind of makes the movie. Just the way he sells the plot is unbelievable. Anyway, so let's move on to our next movie, Mudbound, directed by Dee Reese. It's on Netflix right now. It's a straight-to-Netflix movie. In fact, I think it's Netflix's chance to get nominated for Oscars. It's kind of their horse in the race this year, I kind of feel like. Sean, do you want to describe Mudbound?
Yeah, it's a movie based on a novel of the same name, and it kind of unfolds as two families, a white family and a black family living in, I believe, Mississippi. Each family has a family member who goes off to fight in World War II, and the movie really is juggling a lot of things, not only racism in Mississippi at the time, but dealing with war and coming back from the war and people around you not understanding what you're going through with PTSD. And I really like the movie in many, many ways. It's beautifully shot. It's a beautiful story with very, very complex characters and with a lot going on thematically and emotionally.
Yeah, I loved this movie too. And being a Netflix original, kind of low budget, I think it's like only $10 million budget. Hopefully this is their shot at like Best Picture. And hopefully the Academy doesn't shut them out like they did with Beasts of No Nation in 2015, which was also one of my favorite movies of the year. Like if they'll forgive them for being a streaming site and not releasing it in wide release simultaneously, they could have a shot at it for this film. But yeah, I loved it, and like the movie plays out, and it is such a novel. It's like juggling so many different storylines, and so many different issues that are happening simultaneously. It like feels like an epic drama, and the period piece and the time that it takes place in, and you just like learn a lot. And the place that this movie goes to by the end is so unexpected and so unique and hard to watch. It's extremely powerful, and it had a big impact on me for sure.
Yeah, it's also interesting. I don't think I've ever seen a movie that deals with racism that exists in kind of this time period. It seems like just about everything is either pre-Civil War slavery era or civil rights era or a more modern kind of movie. And that was really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, movies like this usually take place if it's in the South in the 60s or beyond, or you rarely get like a view into life in the earlier parts of the 19th century in the South in America.
Great. So we're going to move on to our final section, the short reviews section. We're going to just run through some movies that we wanted to bring up because they were either really good or we don't really have that much to say about them, but they're still important. So, Brand, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so Beach Rats, it is about a boy who lives in Brooklyn, Coney Island, Brooklyn, and he's kind of brought up in a poor family out in the Brooklyn suburbs, and through online video chat, he kind of starts discovering that he's gay and that he can get things from other men, and it's kind of like a fascinating slice of life of these characters, and I really enjoyed the movie.
Sweet. I wanted to recommend Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond. It's a documentary on Netflix right now about the making of the movie The Man on the Moon, starring Jim Carrey, where he played Andy Kaufman. Basically, Jim Carrey, while filming the movie, he went full in and was Andy Kaufman behind the scenes. And, of course, that meant that he was Tony Clifton at some points, too. So the documentary is all this footage that they filmed where he is being ridiculous off-screen and yelling at people and being hard to work with and just being fully in character. And really, it shows the whole process of it. It shows the impact of him doing that on other people. And, one of the interesting parts of it is that, Jim Carrey went full in. And he reveals that he wanted to have that footage be part of the movie, but the studio, Universal, I think, said, no, we're burying this footage. We don't want this footage to come out and people think that you're a dick, because he was totally being ridiculous backstage. I love the movie The Man on the Moon. I think it's one of Jim Carrey's best movies, and seeing him go full Andy Kaufman and Tony Clifton and seeing director Milos Forman like interact with those people and see Jerry the King Lawler's like his reaction to all of it too. Like, it's just fascinating. So I recommend it to anyone that's a fan of Jim Carrey or especially The Man on the Moon or Andy Kaufman.
Is that on Netflix?
Yep.
Cool. I can't wait to watch that. So the next film, one that I really liked this year, was called BPM, Beats Per Minute. This won second place at Cannes Film Festival this year. So it had a lot of buzz coming out of it. It's a French drama film about the ACT UP organization fighting like AIDS awareness back in the mid 80s. It explores one guy who's joining the group kind of in the middle of their presence there in Paris and learning about that lifestyle, what they do, their protests, and kind of falls in love with somebody who has HIV. And it's a really great film.
Great. I wanted to bring up Suburbicon because we talked about it on our fall preview episode. It's directed by George Clooney and written by the Coen brothers. It turns out this movie was not good. There's a reason why the Coen brothers didn't direct it themselves. It kind of felt like an unfinished script. It was jarring, and it felt like it was weird for the sake of being weird. You know, it had this whole thing about crime and racism in the suburbs and dual standards, but it really just fell flat on most areas. Oscar Isaac's in it, and he's the best part of it, but he just shows up towards the end. Matt Damon's the main character, and he doesn't really do a lot. Like, the movie just, like I said, just kind of feels weird for the sake of being weird, and I do not recommend Suburbicon.
So the next film is called Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman. It was actually kind of funny because I knew very little about this film going in. I actually thought it was a documentary up until when the movie started. But I actually ended up liking it more than I thought. I just went to see it for free, so it was pretty low stakes. But the story it tells is actually pretty fascinating. It reminded me a lot of the film Kinsey with Liam Neeson back in the early 2000s. Kind of explores a lot of psychology with its lead character. But this film is about the creator of Wonder Woman, and he actually has a lot more interesting things about his life than you'd expect. He was a huge feminist back in the early part of the century, and he was in a polyamorous relationship, a very open one. He also invented the lie detector machine, the polygraph, and it just explores this man's life that is more unexpected than you'd think, and it actually was a really good movie.
Is there also a documentary about this guy that just came out?
I thought so
this year,
but
or am I just like totally confused?
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. We were both confused.
Yeah.
No, this is it.
I'm pretty sure there's just a biopic. I mean, I totally could be wrong, but I haven't heard the documentary. I've heard of this. I can't wait to see this. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, this is like a perfect like Netflix movie, and even the end actually has like a really powerful moment that was very well played out and got to me. Recommend it.
Okay. The next movie that we felt like we needed to mention at least is Justice League. I really don't want to talk about this for too long. That noise is correct. To be honest, what I got most about this movie was about how uninteresting it was. It felt like a TV pilot. You know, the characters come together, they fight some bad guys, and the movie ends. I didn't really have much to take away from it. And in fact, I don't know if this is blasphemous to say, but I personally preferred Batman vs. Superman.
For its ambition.
Yeah, Batman vs. Superman was actually trying something. It made some decisions. You know, whether or not those were good decisions, they were decisions, and it was going for something. Justice League felt like a studio playing safe. It felt like there were two different directors making a movie with no real thought behind it. And don't really have too much to say about it.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, me neither. Aside from just wanting to hear Brandon and Derek try to defend their favorite director.
It is getting harder and harder with each film.
I heard that Zack Snyder's next movie is going to be a more personal project, and I'm curious what he's going to be like outside of like the comic book world, what he'll go back to.
Well, last time he did a passion project, he made Punch Perfect.
Super Punch?
Sucker Punch. Sorry.
Sucker Punch. Okay.
So,
well, I want to bring up the movie The Hero. It's directed by Brett Haley. It stars Sam Elliott as an aging actor. I mean, we all know Sam Elliott from like The Big Lebowski and a few other westerns. And it's basically he's an old guy, an actor trying to get work, but it's a really heartfelt story, an easy watch, and just an honest performance. And Sam Elliott just totally kills it. And I feel like he's one of those actors that, we've all seen him and stuff, but he's rarely showcased. So I just wanted to bring up The Hero as a movie that showcases Sam Elliott.
man, I haven't even heard of that movie. That's great. I can't wait to watch it.
So I think that's it for our show today. We'll be back in a few weeks reviewing these movies that we talked about, and we'll have another episode talking about the Oscars and some of the other awards, and then we'll be doing our best of our year-end lists, or top 10. So do you guys have any final thoughts that you want to bring up?
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, Sean, thanks for coming.
It was fun. Yeah.
That was actually really great.
So, Brandon, where can people find you online?
I'm on Letterboxd at Beb. That's B-E-B. I'm on Twitter at Beb727 and Instagram Brandon_Bolby.
Sean, what about you? Do you do social media?
No, I don't really do it. I am a Bulbinator on Letterboxd. Go ahead and follow me.
Cool. And I'm Nick Moffat. You can follow me on Twitter at Moffman23, and you can find me on Letterboxd at Nick Moffat. So, thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you see some movies and enjoy them. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.